Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition read-through of the Player's Handbook. Today, we are going to talk about player character races. We're not going to talk about a specific race today. We're just going to talk about generally how to pick them, what happens when you pick them, and what bonuses and detriments do you get or lose depending on what race you choose. And I realized that rhymed, and I wish I did it on purpose, but I didn't. So we're going to pretend from now on that I did, and I'm awesome, and let's go.
You're a poet and didn't even realize it.
There it is. All right. Player character races. After creating your character's ability scores, you must select a player character race. This is not a race in the true sense of the word. Caucasian, Black, Asian, etc. It is actually a fantasy species. Max,
I have a video on that. I have a video on that before even the whole 5e thing came out to change it. I had a video, that really old video.
That race is not species. You can't be racist to an elf or a dwarf or whatever. You can't, because it's wrong. It's the wrong words. Human, elf, dwarf, gnome, half-elf, or halfling. Each race is different. Each possesses special powers and has different lists of classes to choose from. All 6 of the standard races are described in detail in this chapter. In many cases, broad statements are made concerning the race in general. Players are not bound by these generalities. For example, the statement that dwarves tend to be dour and taciturn does not mean that your character cannot be a jolly dwarf. It means that the garden variety dwarf is dour and taciturn. If player characters were just like everyone else, they wouldn't be adventurers. Make your character unique and he will be more fun to play. I will caveat that saying that if you want to play against type, run it by your dungeon master first to make sure it fits the world. Okay? I'm sorry. You are not going to be able to play a race however you want. If you're playing a dwarf like an elf, the dungeon master should stop you.
They are the embodiment of stereotypes.
Yeah, play the little clip of Michael Jordan saying, "Stop it, get some help." Do that right now, because that's exactly what the dungeon master should do if you're trying to play a dwarf as an elf or an elf as a halfling or whatever. Don't do that. Just play a freaking halfling or play a freaking elf, whatever. Do that instead. All right.
By the way, for the record, for folks out there, I'm not against the word race. I just say think of them as species. I don't say we have to change the term. Okay.
Yeah. Just in this instance, it's better to think of a species and to be more on point. Minimum and max ability scores. All non-human PC races, also called demi-human races, have a minimum and maximum requirements for their ability scores. Now, we already covered min-max for classes. Now it's min-max just to exist. Let me read on. If you want to have a demi-human character, the character's ability scores must be within the allowable range. The min and max for each race is listed on table 7. Your character's sex has no effect on these minimums and maximums. That's new for 2E. I believe in AD&D first edition, your sex could affect your stats.
I think it was just the maximum. I don't think it was a negative penalty. Mage's Musings or somebody in chat can correct me on this, but I think in 1E it just said you couldn't go beyond this point, not that you actually suffered a penalty.
For a female fighter, it was 16 strength.
I forget.
16 or 7, something like that. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe something like that. Consult table 7, and this is in italics, before making any racial adjustments to your character's ability scores. If the basis scores that you rolled up meet the requirements for that race, you can be the race. Even if it later modifies the ability scores so they exceed the maximums or don't meet the minimums. Okay? Very important. Before racial adjustments. If you rolled in range before racial adjustments, you're gold. You're in. Doesn't matter what happens later. Doesn't matter. All right? If there's a minimum dex requirement and later on in your career, you get a magic item that curses you and you minus your dex, you're no longer in that range. Does that mean you're no longer that race? No, it just means you're the dumpiest of that race in that respect. But it doesn't change what you are. Table 7 gives the minimum maximum scores for a newly created character. Must have to be a member of that race. Any character can be human if the player desires. Here we go. These are the requirements we were talking about. A dwarf has a minimum strength of 8. To be a dwarf, you must or have rolled a strength of 8 or higher. If not, keep moving. Keep moving. Try an elf. All right. Elf, minimum of 3. That's basically no minimum at all because you can't roll below a 3. So strength-wise, anyone can be an elf. But Dex, Con, Intelligence, and Charisma have to be a minimum of 6, 7, 8, or 8. Half-elf, you have a minimum Dex of 6, minimum Con of 6, minimum Intelligence of 4. A halfling has a minimum Con of 10. 10!
I mean, they smoke and drink a lot.
They need that for their livers to actually keep functioning and their lungs to actually keep going, right? But a dwarf has a minimum Con of 11. Remember, this is before the racial adjustment. Being a dwarf gives you a +1, but you're not a dwarf yet, dumbass. No. You're in the waiting room. In the waiting room, they look at your base stats. So you must have rolled an 11 or higher. Remember that. And if you roll a Dex of 18, you also cannot be a dwarf because their maximum is 17. You roll an 18, you can't do it. Weird, right? Yeah. Well, go ahead and take a look at the halfling. If you roll a wisdom of 18, you can't even be a halfling. They've done too many recreational drugs. They've drank themselves to where their brain doesn't work that well anymore. You were born too wise. Sorry. Move on. Now, let's take a look at this stuff. Racial ability adjustments. If you choose to make a character a dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling, you now have to adjust some of your character's ability scores. These adjustments are mandatory. All characters of these races receive the adjustments, even if the adjustments raise or lower your character's ability scores beyond the minimums and maximums in Table 7. You do not have to pick a new race. The adjustments can also raise a score to 19 or lower it to 2. Class restrictions and level limits. The human race has one special ability in the AD&D game. Humans can choose any class and can rise to the maximum level in any of those classes. The other races have fewer choices and have an actual ceiling. These restrictions reflect the natural tendencies of the races. The limits are high enough so that a demihuman can achieve power and importance in at least one class. A halfling, for example, can become the best thief in the land, but he cannot become even a great fighter. The limits also exist for play balance. The ability of humans to assume any role and reach any level is their only advantage. On the numbers is their only advantage. The demi-human races have other powers that make them entertaining to play and powerful, particularly the multi-class ability. These powers balance the enjoyment of play against the ability to rise in level. Ask your DM for the level limits imposed on non-human characters. That's in the DM's guide because I imagine that the game doesn't want regular players to know that going in. It doesn't want to color your choices with game mechanics. So that
surprised me. We looked that up recently, and I could have sworn it was in the player's handbook, but I was wrong. It was in the DMG. One of the things that I will note that second edition did with the level restrictions is it increased most of them from first edition. In fact, let's just look at the dwarf for just a second. In first edition AD&D, dwarven clerics exist, but not as player characters. You had
a little asterisk on there saying NPCs only.
Yeah. But now you can be a dwarven cleric, but it increased most of them, and I agree with the increasing to make them a little bit more playable, a little bit more viable over the long term. Where I start to when dungeon masters say, "Oh, I just get rid of level limitations," I say, "Well, you're not playing D&D because you've completely misunderstood the point of what demi-humans are." I won't go. I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole now. So
don't worry, we'll get there. Languages. Racial languages for demi-humans can be handled in either one of two ways, depending on whether or not your DM uses the optional proficiency system, which probably does. Either way, your character automatically knows his native language. Without the proficiency system, your character starts adventuring already knowing a number of additional languages. The additional languages must be chosen from among those listed in his race's description. If you use the proficiency system, your character receives additional languages by using proficiency slots to determine how many languages he knows when he starts adventuring. Demihumans must choose these languages from those listed in the following racial descriptions. Human PCs generally start the game knowing only their regional language. Usually, the game master, the dungeon master, will hand wave this as common. Usually, that's it, common. But if you have a very intricate world, then it'll be high common, low common, or Eastern common, Western common, whatever. It could be all different things. The DM may decide to allow beginning PCs additional languages up to their intelligence score if he feels the PCs had the opportunity to learn these as he grew up. Otherwise, human PCs may learn additional languages as they adventure. So it is possible that you are too dumb to have language proficiencies and you only get one language as a dwarf. Guess what it's going to be? Dwarven. That's all you can speak. Dwarven. That's entirely possible. That means your group, someone better speak Dwarven and Common, or else there's going to be lots of hand waving and gestures going on. Just letting you know.
It's dwarf. Just grunt at him. Okay.
Yeah, I'll get it. So that's what you have to understand. Now, the big one that a lot of people didn't get is consult table 7 before making any racial adjustments to your ability scores. That means table 7 right here. If you are awesome and you rolled, you wanted to be a halfling, but you rolled 3 6s on your wisdom, you cannot be a halfling. You can't. Now, a lot of people ignore that, and I understand. But you shouldn't, because it makes halflings or being a halfling less special. More people can do it. Makes it less special. Now, I don't know a lot of people that ignore the lower level limit, the lower ability score limit, but I know a lot of people who ignore the upper because it's kind of rare. You see, it's mostly 18s for most of them. I mean, there's a 17 here and a 17 here and a 17 here. So there's 3 examples where it's something that you could roll and then it'll invalidate you from being that just because you rolled too well. So if you want to lose that, that's a homebrew. That's on you. And I get it. But please don't lose the lower limit. Please don't.
Because I'm a dwarf with a constitution of 5.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Or, a constitution of 3 and dwarves get a plus what? They get a +1. So the lowest constitution is 4. And let's say the game master allows you to be a 4 con dwarf. You are going to be the sickliest looking dwarf that literally ever existed because no one else exists under a 12. Naturally. So you better have been made fun of your entire life as a dwarf. You better have been. And people and other races that look at you would go, God damn. Have a sandwich, man. They should be saying stuff like that. All right. If you don't have that role play in there, then you're doing it wrong. Then you should not have lowered the minimum. All right. So there's that. Now, what kind of comments do we have? Because next week is when we're going to start going through the actual races, one race at a time.
Okay, let me bring them up here. Again, there are a lot of good things, but we only have time for so much here. Killraven says, I used to be much more open to non-human PCs, but the menagerie that groups have turned into since 3 has worn down my patience entirely. Took the words out of my mouth.
Yep. I agree. Yep.
So,
and they're not even fun to play. They're not special anymore. Racial limits, racial maximums, racial adjustments to ability scores, and level limits and class restrictions. That was all flavor when I was growing up, and when I was doing AD&D and AD&D second edition stuff like that. That meant you had to think ahead for your character, and he meant more to you. But now it's like it's unfair. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Now, one of the things to consider, because I saw a couple of comments like this pop up in chat, and I'm not going to put them all up here. Settings put a little bit of that on its head. You had wild elves, for example, the Dagonesti, Dagonesti in Dragonlance. You had the Tinker Gnomes in Dragonlance. Sorry, I know a lot about Dragonlance. Where wait a minute, that doesn't match what a gnome is or what a halfling or elf or whatever happens to be, right? But those are setting specific, number one. Yeah. But all of those authors still maintain the idea that those races are alien in some way. They didn't just turn them into humans so that you can just play a human with pointed ears and all the dumb benefits you get, like night vision and so on and so forth. Yeah. They still had tropes that they basically must. I'm going to use the word must. Follow.
They still think differently than humans, just also differently than other elves or other gnomes or whatever. The idea was the same. It was the effect that was changed.
Yeah, like Dark Sun with its man-eating halflings. They still weren't human.
Yeah.
All right, the next one here is most players just play humans in funny hats without consideration to culture, alien thought process. They take demi-humans for the powers. Again,
yeah, exactly.
Piggyback on that first one.
That is awful. That's why second edition did the right thing by keeping class restrictions and level restrictions for demi-humans, because they are different. It forces you to remember that they are different, which makes you more apt to play them differently.
Hold on just 1 second. I want to star another one real quickly here. Okay. Then we have Mage's Musings again. Said, one, you can just lower your stat. It doesn't invalidate the option, though I can't recall offhand if they carried that over to 2E. I was waiting to see if you were going to read the rule before I brought that up. I don't know if they brought that over either.
I didn't see it in the ability score rolling section that you can voluntarily lower your stat.
Yeah, so one of the things that we used to do, and somebody said this isn't in second edition either, even though I've been doing it probably my entire age of playing Dungeons & Dragons 2E, is you can always raise a stat by 1 by lowering something else by 2. That was the trick that we did. Now, we did see that in Rule Cyclopedia, right? But somebody's like, because I said I was doing that in AD&D second edition, I've had a few people tell me, no, there is no rule.
Yeah, we just read the whole thing today. I mean, if you're watching this as a video, you have to go back to the other 2 videos,
right?
Especially the last video where we went over the entire section of rolling ability scores. Nowhere in there can you adjust it in that fashion.
Yeah, maybe it's in the DMG, maybe it's in another source book, maybe it just isn't in second edition at all. I don't know, but that is the way we did it. So, house rule, I get it. And then this one, Darthiac said, and this is true, setting overrides the PHB, right? But the
cool thing about AD&D second edition and their setting books is the setting book will actually tell you where this differs from the player's handbook. It'll tell you, no, class, the class advancement or the power works differently here. This is it. Especially if you look at the Dragonlance book, you could almost play second edition Dragonlance or first edition Dragonlance without having the first edition player's handbook.
That's what I do.
Yeah. You don't really need it because it's in the setting book. Now, not all the setting books are that extreme, but all the setting books did tell you how it differed from the player's handbook, why, and what to do going forward.
Right. And I still reiterate the fact that in every one of them, the races were different than being humans. Darthiac also put on there, he thinks that non-humans should have just one class that has no level limit. I disagree. That should only be the purview of humans.
Yep. I mean, there are some races, I think we'll get into that later, that they especially in first edition, some did have unlimited for 1. Or in the case of halfling or half elf 2. But
yeah, half elf is what, mage and thief or something? I forget.
Mage and ranger.
Oh, it might be ranger. Okay.
Yeah. Whereas
we'll find out next week.
Mage unlimited, the dwarf had fighter unlimited, the someone else had thief unlimited. I believe it was halfling had thief unlimited, but everything else had a cap. Second edition, I don't think has unlimited anymore, except for the half elf. I think the half elf still has an unlimited.
Yeah, I think the half elf has 1 if I remember correctly, but I don't allow them. So,
but we're going to get to that next week or the weeks after.
All right. Well, again, a lot of good commentary. I like reading what you guys are posting about either rules corrections or where things came from, certain books, or the idea that that what we're talking about sometimes are house rules and so forth? Absolutely. That's what this commentary and discussion is for while we're reading it. So I appreciate all this stuff because chat's been hopping today. Apparently people like seconded or hate second edition a lot there. But go ahead and close us out, Heathen Dog.
All right. Thank you very much for stopping by and listening to us rant about things we love and things we don't. If you come back next time, we'll be talking about the races in particular, starting, of course, with Dwarf, as you could see from the screen. Starting with Dwarf, we're going to go through all the demi-human races, all of their differences and all of their bonuses and minuses and foibles and special powers and abilities. And yes, their level limits to certain classes and their restriction from certain classes. So we're going to get to all that starting next week. So remember to come see us then too.